Imagine a community celebration. Something so joyous, so steeped in local civic pride that it actually requires NYPD counterterrorism units, bomb-sniffing dogs, and the frantic passing of emergency state legislation just to allow people to walk down Fifth Avenue.
Right, which is, I mean, that's definitely not what you usually picture.
Exactly. Usually when you picture a parade in New York City, there's this expectation of a relaxed, predictable rhythm, right?
Yeah, the barricades go up, the marching bands tune their brass instruments.
Yeah, you just show up, you wave a little flag, you get a soft pretzel, and you enjoy the day.
It's supposed to be the moment a city takes a collective breath, like a pause from the relentless friction of urban life to just enjoy its own diversity.
But step onto the pavement of Manhattan on May 31st, 2026. Specifically, that stretch from 62nd Street to 74th Street, and you will find that entire civic script thrown completely into the East River.
Totally out the window.
Yeah. Today, we are looking at an event that, depending on which of our sources you consult, represents two entirely incompatible realities operating in the exact same physical space.
Which is fascinating, yeah.
If you look through one lens, this parade was a beautiful, historic display of cultural resilience, and an assertion of safety. But if you look through another lens, it was an open, state-sanctioned endorsement of extreme nationalism and alleged war crimes.
We're looking at the absolute definition of an ideological collision course happening in real time right there on the asphalt.
We really are. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. We are thrilled to have you here with us today. We are pointing our microscope at the 2026 Israel Day Parade in New York City.
And to do this properly, to really get into the weeds, we've assembled a stack of sources that is incredibly polarized.
Highly polarized. We are pulling from local, boots-on-the-ground news reports, specifically Eyewitness News, ABC7NY, to grasp the logistical reality of the day.
Right, the logistics.
Then we have the raw, unedited live feeds of the political speeches given right on the parade route. That's from Live Now W, from FOX.
And then we dive into the fierce, unyielding backlash.
Right. We have a detailed report from the progressive news outlet Common Dreams and a highly critical, incredibly vitriolic commentary from a left-wing political YouTuber named Vaush.
It is vital to state our mission right at the top here. If you're tuning in today, hoping we will declare a winner in this debate.
Or hand down some kind of moral verdict.
Exactly. Hand down a verdict on who is morally justified. You are going to leave disappointed. Our job is to act as impartial cartographers. We are here to map out this intense ideological battlefield so you can understand the terrain.
Map the territory, not plant a flag. We are going to unpack exactly what happened on that Sunday morning, who showed up, the brand new legislation that was literally signed into law on the parade route, and why this specific event sparked such a massive multi-layered backlash. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Before we get to the explosive political rhetoric or the international controversies, we really have to understand the physical reality of what was happening on the ground.
Right.
According to our local news source, ABC7NY, organizers built this as the world's largest gathering in support of Israel outside of the state of Israel itself.
You really have to visualize the scale for a second. We aren't talking about like a fringe gathering in a peripheral neighborhood.
No, not at all.
They were expecting tens of thousands of marchers and spectators occupying some of the most expensive and visible real estate on the entire planet.
And the theme for the 2026 parade was highly specific. It was proud Americans, proud Zionists.
Very pointed.
But what immediately leaps off the page from the local reporting is the atmosphere. The reporter, N.J. Burkett, described an unprecedented security plan.
Yeah, the NYPD executed the most extensive security operation they have ever put together for this specific annual event.
That detail alone fundamentally alters the context of the day. I mean, right.
Oh, absolutely. You don't deploy counterterrorism teams to line an entire parade route unless the perceived threat level has fundamentally shifted from previous decades.
Right. The police mandated strict universal screening.
Every single spectator had to pass through checkpoints.
Every single one. And the NYPD explicitly broadcasted that they would not tolerate any disruptions. They warned that unauthorized persons stepping into the route would face immediate arrest.
Think about the psychology of that for a spectator.
It's intense.
Yeah.
You're attending what is billed as a celebration.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to funnel through metal detectors, flanked by officers holding tactical rifles.
It completely shifts the tone from civic festival to secured compound.
Exactly. It feels less like a parade and more like a heavily fortified international border.
Yeah.
And that intense, fortified reality brings us to the first major fracture in the narrative today.
The gaping absence of the mayor of New York City.
Mayor Zohran Mamdani. If you want to understand the polarization of this event, his absence is the first crucial data point we need to look at. Our sources note that New York City mayors attending this parade isn't just like a casual occurrence. The ABC7 report explicitly states that Mayor Mamdani's decision to skip the event broke a tradition dating all the way back to 1965.
We are talking about an unbroken chain of mayoral attendance spanning decades of wildly different administration.
Right. Eric Adams, Bill de Blasio, Michael Bloomberg, Rudy Giuliani.
They all marched.
They all marched. But Mamdani, who the reporting describes as not being a Zionist, flat out refused.
His reasoning, which is captured in the local coverage, pulls absolutely no punches.
What did he say?
Well, he had stated on the campaign trail that he wouldn't attend, and he reiterated that position by stating it has become, quote, harder and harder to wake up every morning and see more and more Palestinians massacred with our tax dollars.
Wow.
Yeah. He explicitly and publicly blasted the Israeli response as an act of genocide.
Let me stop right there because I want to understand the tension of this. The sources point out that Mamdani has condemned the October 7th massacre, right?
Yes, he has.
So he's attempted to walk this razor-thin wire. He's embracing the city's local Jewish community, noting things like the sounds of the shofar echoing across the city during Rosh Hashanah, while simultaneously maintaining an adamantly anti-Zionist and pro-Palestinian political stance.
It's a very difficult balance.
But if you're a local politician, where does your jurisdiction actually end? In the ABC7 piece, Rabbi Joe Potasnik, who actually served on Mamdani's transition team, argued if the mayor is obligated to march.
Right.
Potasnik said, quote, when you're elected mayor, you represent the city of New York, the people who live here with different opinions. He may have his narrative, we may have our narrative. There's no reason why he can't walk with us.
That's the classic civic argument.
So I have to ask you, if a mayor's core job is to represent all residents, to fix the potholes and run the schools, does skipping a major cultural parade fundamentally break the civic contract? Or, in 2026, is it considered a necessary moral stand?
This raises an important question, and I think it depends entirely on how you define the event itself.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, for decades, as that list of mayors shows, marching in this parade was essentially retail politics 101. It was treated as a local cultural touchstone.
Like marching in the Puerto Rican Day Parade or the Lunar New Year Parade.
Exactly. You show up, you smile, you wave at your constituents, you demonstrate that you see them. But Mamdani is rejecting the foundational premise that this is merely a local cultural event.
He's saying the local is the global.
Precisely. And look at the official theme of the parade again. Proud Americans, proud Zionists.
Right.
That explicit phrasing links the event directly to a political ideology and a nation-state project, rather than just a broad ethnic or religious identity.
Which changes things for a politician.
That thematic choice gives a politician like Mamdani the precise grounds to opt out. It allows critics of the war to frame their absence not as an abandonment of Jewish New Yorkers, but as a direct rejection of a specific nation-state's military actions and the ideology underpinning them.
It's a massive shift in how local politicians interact with international conflicts. I mean, Mamdani is essentially declaring, I'm the mayor of this city, but I cannot divorce my physical presence on this local avenue from the geopolitical reality of where American tax dollars are flowing.
Exactly.
But, if you are a listener right now wondering how a local mayor can just boycott a massive city event without facing an immediate recall, you have to understand that this absence didn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it created a vacuum.
Right. Because the mayor wasn't there to take the center stage.
Right.
The spotlight shifted with blistering intensity onto the establishment Democrats who did show up.
The contrast is... it's startling. While the progressive mayors stayed home, the institutional weight of the state and federal government descended on Fifth Avenue to fill that void.
And we have the raw transcript from the Fox News live feed, which gives us an unfiltered, unedited look at exactly what these officials wanted to communicate. Let me tell you, if you were expecting lighthearted parade banter, this was not it.
No. It was incredibly heavy. It functioned as a masterclass in political framing.
Yeah.
The rhetoric deployed on that stage reveals exactly how these leaders perceive the current existential moment for their constituents.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer set the tone immediately. We were talking about the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in American history. And he didn't open his remarks by dissecting modern geopolitical strategy or the nuances of Middle Eastern diplomacy.
He bypassed the present entirely.
He anchored his speech in the 1940s. He told the crowd, quote, "If there had been a state of Israel in 1941, dozens of my ancestors would have been able to flee Nazi persecution."
Notice the mechanics of that argument. He's drawing a direct historical through line.
Yeah.
He is taking the existential terror of the Holocaust, the ultimate vulnerability of a stateless people, and linking it inextricably to the necessity of a modern, militarized state of Israel today.
He stated point blank that Jewish safety is never guaranteed without a homeland. And he used this incredibly evocative quote from the Irish writer Conor Cruise O'Brien. He said, "Anti-Semitism is a light sleeper."
A light sleeper.
And then Schumer updated that 20th century concept for the digital age. He warned that this ancient hatred is now being driven by the exact same lies as before, but instead of relying on pamphlets, it's transmitted at the speed of a fiber optic internet connection, arriving on a smartphone in your pocket in 30 seconds.
Let's unpack anti-Semitism is a light sleeper for a second. That phrase does an enormous amount of heavy lifting in Schumer's worldview.
How so?
It suggests that assimilation, economic success, or political integration in the diaspora is ultimately a facade. It implies that even reaching the level of Senate Minority Leader in the United States does not fundamentally insulate you from the historical pattern of persecution. The light sleeper concept argues that the State of Israel functions as the ultimate, necessary insurance policy for when, not if, that hatred wakes up again.
It's a worldview rooted entirely in the anticipation of threat.
Exactly.
And he wasn't alone in this framing. New York Attorney General Letitia James took the stage and approached the concept of protection from a different angle. She focused on intersectional solidarity and legal force.
Right.
She framed her attendance as an African American standing with the Jewish community against hate, noting historical alliances between the two communities. But then she transitioned into her role as the state's top prosecutor.
And she was forceful.
She promised forcefully that anyone committing an act of hate or anti-Semitism in New York would have to, quote, get by this attorney general, assuring the crowd she would pursue full prosecution.
James is utilizing the authority of her office to validate the anxiety of the crowd. She is projecting an aura of institutional protection, essentially assuring the marchers that the legal apparatus of the state is mobilized on their behalf.
So we have historical trauma from Schumer, prosecutorial protection from Jan, and then the transcript references State Controller Tom DiNapoli and City Controller Mark Levine.
Levine touted his Jewish identity and the diversity of the community.
But DiNapoli's introduction introduced a fascinating, highly technical element into this emotional parade. He wasn't just offering rhetorical support. The speaker introducing him praised DiNapoli because he, quote, courageously does the right thing in investing in Israel bonds because he does right by New Yorkers.
Yes.
Wait, stop right there. You're telling me the state controller is using New York retirement money to buy foreign war debt. How does that actually work mechanically?
It is a profound fusion of municipal finance and international geopolitics.
Okay.
A state controller manages the state's massive pension funds, right? What DiNapoli is being praised for is actively directing portions of those state treasury funds or pension assets to purchase Israel bonds.
So sovereign debt.
Essentially sovereign debt issued by the government of Israel. By buying these bonds, New York State is lending capital directly to the Israeli government.
So it moves the support from we stand with you to we are literally financing you.
Exactly. It's a demonstration of economic solidarity that transcends mere political theater. It provides material support to a foreign state while positioning it domestically as a secure, profitable investment for New York's retirees.
That is wild to think about happening at a local parade. But here's where it gets really interesting. Governor Kathy Hochul and City Council Speaker Julie Menin took the stage to announce something tangible that had literally just occurred.
Right, the buffer bill.
They announced the passing and signing of the buffer bill. Menin noted it passed the city council 44-5.
Oh.
Hochul announced she had signed it into state law just 1 hour before the parade began.
Just 1 hour. The timing of that signing is pure political theater, designed to deliver a concrete legislative victory to the crowd at the exact moment they are gathered.
Let's get into the mechanics of this because the sources describe it, but I want to understand how it functions. According to Hochul's speech, the buffer bill provides a protective zone around houses of worship to prevent harassment and intimidation. She stated, quote, "When you go to worship with your families, you should not have to endure harassment, intimidation, or hatred from anyone."
And to underscore the emotional weight, she recounted a deeply personal story.
Yeah, she talked about flying to Israel 10 days after October 7th. She lost her father on the flight over to Ben Gurion Airport, but rather than turn around and go home to grieve, she stayed. She visited Kibbutz Kfar Aza to comfort survivors of the massacre.
It is a remarkable rhetorical technique. She's blending profound, relatable personal grief with state-level legislative action to create an impenetrable moral argument for the bill.
It is powerful. But strip away the emotion for a second. When I read through these sources about the buffer bill, my mind immediately went to the concept of free speech zones.
Ah, yeah.
You are trying to protect religious freedom and the physical safety of worshipers, which is a core duty of government. But by legislating a physical buffer zone, say, dictating that protesters must stay 50 or 100 feet away from an entrance, you are inherently restricting where political protests can physically take place on public sidewalks in a densely packed urban environment like New York City.
Which is very difficult to do.
How does that work legally?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a massive constitutional tightrope. The government generally cannot restrict the content of free speech on a public sidewalk, but it can regulate the time, place, and manner of that speech if there is a compelling state interest.
In this case, public safety and the free exercise of religion.
Exactly. But we have to look at why this specific bill was deemed an emergency right now. From our vouch source, the YouTube critique, we know that a major recurring flashpoint in New York City has been protests outside of synagogues. But crucially, these protests weren't targeting standard Sabbath services. They were specifically targeting synagogues that were allegedly hosting real estate auctions for land situated in the West Bank.
Ah, so there's the friction point. The progressive argument is that if a religious building is hosting a commercial event, selling contested land in an active international conflict zone, it temporarily ceases to be purely a house of worship and functions as a commercial entity, making it a valid, unprotected site for political protest.
That is the exact tension. But the state's response, crystallized by Hochul and Menin through this buffer bill, is to draw a hard, uncompromising legal line.
Right, no exceptions.
The state is declaring that a house of worship retains its protected status regardless of the ancillary activities happening inside. And by signing this bill an hour before the parade and announcing it from the stage, they're utilizing the parade route not just as a cultural celebration, but as an active legislative signing ceremony.
They're looking at the crowd and saying, "We hear your anxiety, and we are literally redrawing the legal geography of the city's sidewalks to insulate you."
Exactly.
So take a step back and synthesize this entire stage for me. You have Schumer invoking the Holocaust, James promising state prosecutions, DiNapoli buying foreign sovereign debt, and Hochul creating legal buffer zones. If you are reading this transcript, what is the overarching narrative being constructed by the Democratic establishment?
The narrative is entirely defined by threat and institutional fortification.
Yeah.
Read through the transcript of those speeches. You will not find celebrations of Israeli technological innovation or literature or cuisine or art.
Nothing like that.
The rhetoric was universally defensive. The parade was framed by its most prominent speakers not as a celebration of vibrant life, but as a defiant, militarized stand against impending annihilation.
The message is, we are here because we survived, and we will mobilize the entire apparatus of the state, the police, the treasury, the legislature to ensure we keep surviving.
It is an incredibly potent projection of unity, but as our sources reveal, projecting that flawless unity on stage required completely ignoring a massive, uncomfortable reality marching right alongside them on the street.
And this transition right here is where the narrative of a peaceful civic celebration completely breaks down, because while New York Democrats were on stage talking about fighting bigotry and ensuring safety, the Common Dreams article and the Vouch video point out a glaring reality about who exactly was walking down Fifth Avenue with them.
Yeah, this is key.
We are talking about the presence of extreme right-wing Israeli government officials.
This is where the concept of the parade as a simple local display of Jewish pride becomes inextricably tangled in the brutal reality of Israeli state politics.
According to our sources, the Israeli government sent roughly 10 members of the Israeli Knesset, their parliament, to attend this parade. And the most radioactive figure among them was Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister.
The presence of Smotrich is the absolute lightning rod for the entire progressive backlash we are going to discuss.
Why is he so controversial?
To understand the outrage, we have to understand what he represents globally in 2026.
The Common Dreams article lays out his resume, and it is staggering to think about this in the context of a New York parade. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, recently requested an arrest warrant for Smotrich.
Yes.
This request stems from his efforts to forcibly expel thousands of Palestinians from their homes in the West Bank, actions cited as severe violations of international law. The article notes his instrumental role in expanding Israeli settlements, but perhaps most chillingly, the source states he publicly called for the annihilation of Gaza in 2024.
It is worth noting, as the Common Dreams piece does via a New York Times report, that Smotrich was technically not listed as part of the official delegation sent by the Israeli government.
That feels like an administrative technicality, honestly, because he was there. He marched down the avenue, and he wasn't an isolated extremist in the group.
No, he wasn't alone.
The delegation included Amichai Eliyahu, the heritage minister. According to the source, Eliyahu was previously quoted as saying Israel was rushing toward Gaza being wiped out.
The YouTube commentator, Vaush, expands on this, providing a litany of other names and quotes associated with the officials present.
Who else?
He mentions Yitzhak Wasserlov, claiming he encouraged soldiers regarding violence against Palestinian infants. He cites Ariel Kalner, quoting him as advocating for starvation and a Nakba that would overshadow the mass displacement of 1948. He mentions Amir Ohana, suggesting Gazan should simply be relocated to London or Paris.
And it wasn't just politicians. The Common Dreams article points out a detail flagged by a Palestinian journalist: the display of the IDF Golani Battalion flag on the parade route.
Right.
The source accuses this specific battalion of being behind the killing of 15 Palestinian paramedics in Rafah the previous year.
The juxtaposition here is mind-bending. You have establishment American Democrats Schumer, Hochul, James standing on a stage preaching a message of solidarity against hate and the need for localized safety. Meanwhile, occupying the exact same physical space, shielded by the exact same NYPD counterterrorism units, you have foreign ministers who are actively advocating for ethnic cleansing and facing international arrest warrants for war crimes.
Let me push back on this because the logistics of this blow my mind. How does the city even handle that? You have the NYPD, a local law enforcement agency, providing an unprecedented security perimeter to protect an individual who has an active request for an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. Does that not create a bizarre jurisdictional nightmare?
What's fascinating here is it highlights the limitations of international law within sovereign U.S. borders, especially regarding a close ally.
Okay, because the U.S. isn't in the ICC.
Exactly. The U.S. isn't a party to the ICC, so local police have no mandate to act on those warrants. But politically, it creates what we might call a crisis of collateral association.
Collateral association.
Right. Politicians like Chuck Schumer and Kathy Hochul are attending this parade to support their local Jewish constituents. They are speaking to the voters, standing in front of them in Manhattan, celebrating the abstract idea of Israel as a necessary sanctuary.
But the progressives are arguing you can't just separate the abstract idea from the physical men walking behind you. You can't just say, I'm marching for the concept of a homeland, but please ignore the guy next to me calling for the annihilation of Gaza.
That is the crux of the progressive argument. In an era of hypervisibility and immediate digital documentation, you cannot cleanly sever the idea of a state from the reality of its current government.
Right. There are cameras everywhere.
Exactly. The left argues that by sharing the street with Smotrich, by allowing him to participate in an event sanctioned by the state and protected by the NYPD, these establishment Democrats are implicitly laundering his reputation. They are mainstreaming his extremism.
And this glaring double standard in how politicians are treated based on who they associate with is explicitly called out in the Common Dreams piece. They quote Ben Rhodes, a former national security official under the Obama administration.
What did Rhodes say?
He poses a devastatingly pointed question. He says, quote, why is it controversial for Zohran to skip a parade because of his principles, but not for Democratic politicians to march with a fascist bigot like Smotrich?
Rhodes is exposing the established hierarchy of acceptable political behavior within the American establishment.
Yeah.
Skipping a parade to protest a war is treated as a major civic scandal, a breach of decorum that demands condemnation from the ADL and political rivals. But marching shoulder to shoulder with an accused war criminal is treated as a regrettable but ultimately acceptable cost of doing local political business.
The article also features a quote from Ali Abunimah, the director of Electronic Intifada, who flips the entire narrative of safety on its head. Schumer spent his speech talking about ensuring Jewish safety, but Abunimah wonders how the hundreds of thousands of Muslim New Yorkers, including Palestinian Americans, are supposed to feel safe in their own city when the New York City police commissioner is marching in the same parade as officials calling for ethnic cleansing.
It's a powerful point.
He poses a rhetorical question. Would Mayor Mamdani keep a police chief who marched in a parade with the Ku Klux Klan?
The local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America went even further, stating categorically that Smotrich should be arrested to face justice, and declaring that every politician who marched with him aligned themselves with Israel's crimes.
Wow.
The presence of these specific ministers acted as a solvent. It completely dissolved the organizers' attempt to frame the parade as a simple cultural celebration, dragging the brutal geopolitical reality of the conflict directly onto Fifth Avenue.
And that dissolution of the narrative is what fueled the intense, unyielding criticism from the left. Which brings us to the most complex part of today's deep dive. The backlash we see in these progressive sources isn't just about disagreeing with a specific military policy. It is a fundamental challenge to the entire premise of what the parade claims to be.
They are actively rejecting the label of the parade as a Jewish celebration.
Let's look at the statement from Beth Miller, the political director for Jewish Voice for Peace, or JVP. In the Common Dreams article, she explicitly targets the Anti-Defamation League.
The ADL.
Right. The ADL had forcefully condemned Mayor Mamdani for skipping what they termed the city's largest and most visible Jewish celebration. Beth Miller responds by saying, quote, "It's anti-Semitic to conflate Jews and Israel."
This is a crucial ideological fault line that defines modern Jewish political discourse.
How so?
The ADL, representing the mainstream establishment, views the state of Israel as inherently central to modern Jewish identity. Therefore, a celebration of the state is, by definition, a celebration of the people. JVP, however, views the actions of the nation-state as entirely distinct from, and in this specific instance, antithetical to, core Jewish values.
Miller goes on to say, quote, "As a Jewish person who lives here, I'm pretty glad we finally have a mayor who isn't at a parade celebrating atrocity crimes." She completely severs her personal Jewish identity from the event happening on the avenue.
It's a complete rejection.
But if you want to see that premise not just severed, but absolutely pulverized, we have to look at the YouTube critique from Vaush.
When you engage with a source like this, you have to brace yourself. The rhetoric Vaush uses is exponentially more aggressive and inflammatory than anything found in print journalism.
Oh, yeah.
It is explicitly designed to shock the listener and provoke a visceral reaction.
He does not mince words. He explicitly calls the Israeli government a Nazi government and refers to the event on Fifth Avenue as a Nazi parade. He says of the politicians involved, "These people are Nazis."
As analysts of these sources, we have to separate the inflammatory labeling from the underlying structural critique he is attempting to construct.
Which is hard to do when the language is that intense.
Exactly. The use of the word Nazi is clearly a deliberate, highly radioactive provocation. He is aiming that word directly at the historical trauma Chuck Schumer was referencing in his speech. But if we dig beneath the name-calling, Vaush is offering a complex critique about the nature of nationalism and how cultures are manufactured.
Right. He uses an analogy to make his point. He compares the Israel Day Parade to an Irish Pride Parade.
A very interesting comparison.
He points out that when people celebrate St. Patrick's Day or an Irish parade, you don't typically have politicians commandeering the microphone just to assert that the nation of Ireland has a right to exist and that everything its military does is infallible.
Right.
Usually a cultural parade celebrates actual culture, Irish poets, mythology, history, dancing, literature. But his critique of the Israel Day Parade, and it's worth noting this aligns perfectly with our earlier analysis of the politicians' speeches, is that it lacked actual cultural celebration.
It was heavily political.
He argues it functioned solely to celebrate political legitimacy, military bonds, and historical trauma. He says, quote, "It's never a celebration of Israeli culture. It's always a celebration of its political legitimacy and its existence."
He is advancing the argument that the apparatus of the state has entirely subsumed the culture. In his view, the culture on display isn't organic. It is merely the promotional material for a project of settler colonialism. And to cement this point, he takes a fascinating, deeply historical detour into linguistics.
This is the part of the source that really made me stop and think. He brings up the linguistic divide between Yiddish and Hebrew. Explain the mechanics of this argument to me, because he claims that early Zionists largely rejected Yiddish.
Yes.
He describes Yiddish as the authentic language of the diaspora, the language of survival for a marginalized people who were constantly facing exile and navigating oppression across Europe. But he argues that Zionists intentionally favored the revival of Hebrew, creating a syncretic language to serve as the bedrock for a nationalistic colonial project in the Middle East.
It is a sweeping claim, but it touches on real linguistic history.
Okay, unpack that for me.
For centuries, Hebrew was primarily a liturgical language used for prayer and study, while Yiddish was the everyday, secular language of Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe.
Right, the language of the street, basically.
Exactly. When the modern Zionist movement began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a conscious, arduous effort to revive Hebrew as a spoken, everyday language. Vaush is arguing that this wasn't just a practical decision, it was an ideological one.
Ideological in what way?
He argues that reviving Hebrew was a way to bypass the recent history of European victimization and connect the modern political movement directly to ancient biblical claims of sovereignty in the Levant. He views the use of Hebrew at the parade not as a simple communicative tool, but as a politically engineered weapon of nationalism.
He's saying that even the language they speak is a manufactured political tool rather than an organic expression of ethnic joy. And speaking of manufactured realities, he hones in on a visual detail from the parade that is incredibly surreal.
The AI cutouts.
Yes. Vaush notes this bizarre dystopian detail from the ground. Attendees were seen holding up AI-generated cardboard cutouts of Mayor Mamdani and his wife, happily holding Israeli flags.
Just think about the layers of that.
It's wild. The actual physical mayor refused to attend because he fundamentally believes the state is committing genocide.
Yeah.
So parade attendees used artificial intelligence to generate fake, photorealistic images of him supporting their cause, printed them out on cardboard, and marched them down Fifth Avenue.
Vaush uses this specific detail to launch a harsh psychological critique. He argues that these cutouts represent a deeper systemic issue within the movement, the overwhelming compulsion to force consent and manufacture optics at all costs.
Right.
If the physical reality of the mayor boycotting your event does not suit your political narrative, you simply utilize technology to synthesize an alternative reality where he is perfectly compliant.
He uses incredibly dark language to describe this phenomenon, comparing the desire to force people into political positions they didn't consent to as a predisposition to rape.
Yeah.
Again, highly explosive, offensive language to many. Yeah. Very explosive.
But I want to pause here and really grapple with this. So what does this all mean? If you are listening to this, calling an Israel Day parade a Nazi parade is about the most radioactive, alienating language imaginable, especially considering Schumer literally invoked his family fleeing the actual Nazis.
It's extremely alienating, yes.
How do we, as impartial observers of these sources, distill the core philosophical argument buried beneath this YouTuber's incredibly inflammatory delivery?
If we act as a filter, if we strip away the deliberate offense and look solely at the underlying mechanics of his argument, the core critique from Vaush, and articulated in a more measured way by JVP, is about the concept of the weaponization of identity.
The weaponization of identity.
Yes, they are arguing that the parade and the political establishment that sustains it uses the very real, undeniably horrific trauma of the Holocaust as an impenetrable shield.
Let's use a metaphor here. It's like they're describing a political immune system. The argument is that the historical trauma of the Holocaust created these massive institutional antibodies.
I like that analogy. And now, those antibodies attack any modern critique of the state's military actions as if it were a deadly virus of ancient hatred.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The argument is that by constantly invoking past victimization by starting a speech in 1941 instead of 2026, the State of Israel and its supporters attempt to legally and morally inoculate themselves against accusations that they are currently victimizing Palestinians.
That makes sense.
Vaush argues they, quote, need anti-Semitism to exist because without it, they couldn't fuel the persecution complex that allows them to argue in favor of the genocide. It is a brutal, unforgiving critique that accuses the organizers of exploiting historical trauma to justify modern-day atrocities.
And this brings us to a fascinating macro observation mentioned in the Common Dreams article, courtesy of journalists Ryan Grimm and Crystal Ball.
Yes, the crystal ball quote.
They point out a geopolitical irony that perfectly captures the profound polarization of this specific moment in history. They note that while New York City, and by extension the U.S. political establishment, was rolling out the red carpet for this Israeli delegation, welcoming extreme right-wing ministers with open arms, parade routes, and elite police protection, the United Kingdom was simultaneously barring left-wing pro-Palestinian commentators Hassan Piker and Cenk Uygur from entering their country.
Right. The UK border forces flagged those commentators, suggesting their presence might not be conducive to the public good.
And Crystal Ball sardonically tweeted that these two concurrent events perfectly encapsulated Western values.
It brilliantly illustrates the underlying battle over acceptable discourse. Who exactly is deemed a threat to public order?
That's the real question.
In New York, the people protesting the war outside of real estate options are viewed as the threat, requiring massive NYPD mobilization and the hasty drafting of new buffer bills. Meanwhile, the ministers actively overseeing the war are given a parade route.
And across the pond.
Across the Atlantic in the UK, the commentators criticizing the war are deemed the intolerable threat and denied entry. It reveals how the establishment apparatus in Western democracies is aggressively defining who is conducive to the public good and who must be silenced or buffered away.
Which brings us to the end of an incredibly heavy, dense stack of sources. To recap our journey today, we have seen how a single iconic stretch of Fifth Avenue in New York City was transformed into a literal proxy for a global war.
We saw the NYPD deploy an unprecedented counterterrorism operation, shifting a civic festival into a secured zone.
We saw establishment politicians like Chuck Schumer and Kathy Hochul doubling down on historical trauma, utilizing a parade stage to announce new legislative buffers and promote the purchasing of foreign war bonds with state pensions.
We examined the severe cognitive dissonance of those exact same Democratic leaders sharing a parade route with extreme right-wing Israeli ministers who are facing ICC warrants and openly advocating for ethnic cleansing.
And we explored the fierce, unyielding backlash from the progressive left. Groups like JVP and commentators like Vaush, who are fighting a linguistic, cultural, and political battle to separate Jewish identity from the actions of the State of Israel, accusing the establishment of weaponizing historical trauma to shield themselves from modern accountability.
It serves as a stark reminder that in our hyper-connected fiber optic world, there is almost no such thing as a purely local event anymore. The geopolitics are always present, marching right alongside the local marching bands.
Exactly. When you are scrolling through your newsfeed tomorrow, you see a 30-second clip of a local parade or a headline about a mayor skipping a civic event. Remember how many dense layers of international conflict, historical trauma, and ideological warfare might be moving right beneath the surface? It is never just a walk down the street.
It is contested territory, every inch of it.
It truly is. And that leaves us with one final thought based on today's dive. The sources talked extensively about Governor Hochul's new buffer bill. A literal, physical, and legal boundary drawn onto the map of New York City sidewalks to protect houses of worship from the friction of these global protests.
Right.
It makes sense on a fundamental security level. But as international conflicts increasingly dominate our local city politics, as mayors are forced to take stances on foreign wars, it leaves us with a profound question to mull over. We can legislate physical buffer zones on our physical sidewalks. We can tell people to stand 50 feet away.
Yeah.
But in an age of instantaneous fiber optic information, algorithmic outrage, and deep, unbridgeable ideological divides, is it even possible to create a conversational buffer zone anymore? Or are we destined to fight every global war loudly and polarizingly on our own main streets? Think about it. We'll see you next time.